Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the APS Webinar series. We're so glad to have you with us tonight, whether you're tuning in on Facebook or YouTube, as we continue with this season of thought-provoking conversations with some of the most insightful voices in the paranormal field. I'm Ted Willis, the Assistant Director for the Association of Paranormal Study, and your host for this evening. And I'll also be keeping an eye on the chat, so feel free to say hi, ask questions, and share your thoughts throughout the webinar. Before we dive in, I want to take a moment to shout out some people. Are, I'll, I'll talk about this first. First of all, mark your calendars for Saturday, August 23rd in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. We will host the second Paranormal Research Symposium. This conference is a one-of-a-kind opportunity to connect with researchers, investigators, and scholars from across the paranormal spectrum, with track covering parapsychology, cryptozoology, spiritual studies, and more. Early bird tickets are available now, and lodging blocks are filling up, so don't wait. We also want to give a shout out to one of our incredible sponsors for the symposium, and that is Ghostly Images. Ghostly Images has done a really good job of working with us in the past 2 years to help get this symposium off the ground, so we're very excited to have them as a sponsor. You can find all the details for the symposium through our social media pages, so be sure to follow us if you haven't already. Now, for tonight, we're absolutely thrilled to welcome Victoria J., an author, podcaster, and researcher whose work dives deep into the intersection of demonic folklore, horror media, and real-world paranormal narratives. Her first book, The Black Hours, Modern Demonic Experiences and Folklore, built on her graduate research from Utah State University, and she's contributed to numerous publications, including American Paranormal Magazine and Haunted History Chronicles. Currently, she's working on her second book, tracing how demonic fantasy and media has shaped the satanic panic and modern-day demonology. Tonight, she'll be helping us unpack how pop culture and media often distort ideas about demons and why those inaccuracies can be misleading and even dangerous. So, please welcome the fabulous, the wonderful Victoria J. Victoria, I'm so excited you're here with us tonight. I got to meet you last year at the symposium, and it's going to be a fantastic evening just to hear you talk again.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so sad I can't come to the symposium this year, but always hoping for next year.
Yes, hoping for next year. All right, well, I'm going to be monitoring the chat. I'm going to pop off, and Victoria, take it away.
All right. So I couldn't get my PowerPoint for everyone to work today, so I'm pretty much going to be reading off of that. You'll just have to look at my face a little longer. But today we're going to be talking about classifying demons in a demonic fantasy world. I'm Victoria J. I am the demon folklorist, and let's get into the different things that happen when you are dealing with pop culture, para-celebrities. Even the Catholic Church aren't quite correct as far as demonology goes. As far as a roadmap, tonight we're going to be talking about my credentials and my story of possession, but only a little bit. And then different definitions of demon and demonic fantasy, because my definitions might be a little bit different than yours. And also ancient classification errors based on a true story, paranormal TV, demons and horror, specific demonic fantasies, the very famous Annabelle, because she has reached cultural relevance once again. Classifying the Conjuring series and The Exorcist Believer, I will be using information from my book to go into what is accurate and what is inaccurate in these very popular movies. And then also demons, serial killers, and mass shootings, and what the big problem with all of this is. Because demonic fantasy, this funny little thing, if it didn't have real world consequences. So my credentials are that I am a supernatural folklorist who graduated with my master's in folklore from Utah State University. My thesis work was classifying published narratives into a system organized by sight, sound, smell, and feeling. I specialize in demonic narratives, experiences, phenomena, and media. And when I was 19 years old, I was possessed by something malevolent. It was not a demon, as my research proved, but it did nearly kill me. And that experience is detailed in my book, The Black Hours. So if you read it and you're like, I had something really similar happen, I'd love to hear from you, because I'm still trying to find answers as to what happened to me. Now, what is a demon? So I define them by what they can do and not what they are. A demon is a spirit in that they exist without bodies, possess abilities greater than that of humans, which renders them inhuman. They are hyper-intelligent. They react negatively to Christian religious iconography, and they are malevolent in their behavior towards humans. That's my own definition taken from my book. As far as demonic fantasy, if my thing will load, this is when it's my term for a phenomenon I've noticed doing this kind of work. So this is when fiction and entertainment are taken as fact, leading to false beliefs and ideas about demons. And it becomes a much bigger problem, but we'll get into that a little bit later. First, in order to go forward, we're going to have to go back, way, way back, ancient times back. There are some ancient classification errors that exist going back to the time of the Yahweh cult, when it was first forming and it later became Christianity. During this stage, everything that was not of God and his angels became automatically labeled a demon. It became an umbrella term for everything wandering around at the time, including jinn-like entities, dibukim, ghosts, things like that. So even other humans that were in opposition, like living humans, to the cult became called Shedim. And then later this was translated and retranslated and mistranslated in the Bible. So a lot of the things that we call demons are actually not. It became an umbrella term for spirit-related maliciousness. When it comes to demons in horror movies, there is this fascination with the ultimate human-hating evil. Bigger, stronger, more intelligent, extremely difficult. And then the possibility of it using your body to do evil. I personally think that it's because the average American feels powerless in this day and age to forces beyond their control. Things like the economy or recessions. What exactly are we going to do to stop that? It's kind of the same thing if you were to have a demon enter your life. There's not a ton you personally could do if that did happen. Now, demon movies are interesting because they're not even about demons. For the people who are like, oh, demon movies glorify evil. Well, they don't, because if you really watch it again, they're actually about us. They're about human beings and the way that we are tested when coming face to face with evil, because they ask us at a very human level, how far are you willing to go to save the person who has been victimized? Will you do anything to make sure that they make it through? So it is one of those things, but there is a lot of demonic fantasy happening in horror movies. They're one of the big reasons why demonic fantasy happens. And it makes sense. These movies are not hiring demonologists or even folks like myself who work in demonology. I wouldn't call myself a demonologist because I don't do what they do. I don't go into these. I am not an exorcist. I am trying to help the best I can, but with information and read. And I also don't translate old documents or anything like that. So I deal with the folklore side of things. But these people aren't being hired at all. People who have actual experiences with the demonic or who study it like I do. And the reason is because filmmakers like to bend things to their vision for the movie. And there's nothing wrong with that. Horror movies aren't even the problem. But these demonic fantasies do embed themselves into public consciousness. And I'll be explaining some different specific demonic fantasies a little bit later. But we still have to start really kind of at the beginning. And the first movie that comes to mind is Rosemary's Baby, 1968. So this made some seem hyper realistic. And it really fed audiences the idea that Satanists were everywhere, around every corner. They had normal jobs. You couldn't escape them. And then right after were the Manson murders in 1969. The 70s, right after that, were a time of great unrest in the US. Abortion rights, feminist movements, anti-cult sentiment, counterculture backlash, Watergate and Nixon's impeachment still had the country reeling. Divorce rates were skyrocketing. The nuclear family, as we knew it, was disintegrating. And that's when the unholy trinity was birthed. The Exorcist in 1973, The Omen in 1976, and the Amityville Horror in 1979. Then Satanic Panic began to build. And it had really been building since the 60s. There were new laws about daycare providers, which wasn't as common in the 60s, but by the 80s, two-income households were very common. So people were wondering, who are we leaving our kids with? And then also not just daycare providers, but caretakers. So, oh no, unfortunately, it looks like I need to plug in my laptop. I am so sorry, everybody, but I will be right back.
In the meantime, this is another chance to plug the symposium. Yeah, Victoria and I were chatting before, and she was one of our speakers last year. Did fantastic work, and she's back. It's all yours.
All right, like if you want to finish, totally go ahead. I'm sorry, guys. That was real unprofessional. I did not realize that my computer was ready to die right then. But anyway, so Satanic Panic is it is a moral panic that happened in the 80s. And it's one of those things that sounds kind of crazy when you try to explain this to somebody who's never heard of it. I had never heard of it. I was born mid-90s. And the first time I heard about it was in a movie. It's called Regression. It has Ethan Hawke in it. And I was like, wait, this is like a real thing that happened? Because it sounds crazy. But moral panics happen when a certain group is targeted. And people begin to believe all sorts of things about them, like that they're dangerous or that they are really a danger to society. They get very, very big and then they get snuffed out because that fear is no longer logical in the frame of what's going on. So Satanic Panic really had been building since Rosemary's Baby. But what really launched this moral panic was Michelle Remembers. And this was a book that came out in 1980. This follows the very imaginative claims of Michelle Proby and Lawrence Pastor, her psychiatrist unraveling her psyche after satanic ritual abuse, or also known as SRA. And this had happened to her supposedly since she was about 5. The real problem is that her story is a cobbling together of different satanic related films and a real case that reached her home in Canada that was actually pretty big here in the US, in Washington, but it didn't ever reach national status. It was just in Washington. And then it, went over to Canada. But it was a very tragic about a 3-year-old who the cult that he was living in thought he was demonically possessed, and they kept exorcising him over and over again until eventually the poor boy died. So I'm sure that she got quite a few ideas from this. On top of actually marrying Dr. Pastor, and she actually his attention because he already had an interest in witchcraft and all these sorts of things because of his missionary work in Africa. So Eventually, this led to occult crime seminars where the police were taught to misidentify evidence of SRA. And he was one of the main proponents of this. And not only that, he eventually later was, because her story could not be corroborated whatsoever. There was no evidence, not on her body, not in people from her childhood helping with the story, to prove that this had ever happened to her. Kind of things that she was out that are horrifying would have shown up on her body, but none of it probably happened. And Dr. Pazder later was like, well, it's not so much that it's real as much as it's real to her, except my thought is, well, it was pretty real when you were giving testimony on criminal cases and sending people to prison. So, one of those things. But it got really, really big. And then by the 90s, Satanic Panic actually hit its peak in 1990. By the mid-90s, it had pretty much appeared. A new fear instead took hold in film about 1998 is when it first showed up, but then really exploded in 1999. And it really centered around the idea of the end of the world was coming. This was my first apocalyptic event. I was 6. It was fine. Everything was fine, but people were really concerned about this. A good movie that actually shows off like the secular panic combined with kind of like Christian related panic is End of Days, which came out in 1999. But really this centered on, did the Christians know more than they were letting on about the end of the world? Was it here? And was it our fault? There were even movies that we're kind of pointing fingers at women being like, are women whores? And it's like, no, like it was all very misogynistic. This idea that like women were the reason that this was all ending. Watch Stigmata from 1999 if you want to know what I'm talking about. But the secular part of this fear was that coding systems wouldn't be able to handle the 1999-2000 switch. So it was the end of computers, at least, and that's the world as we knew it. So these movies, though, continued for several years. Even after 2000 came and went, it was a great party. I fell asleep. I was 6, but all it really signaled to me were great hats. My family didn't think it was real. And yeah, we had a great time. But after 2000 came and went, we had a resurgence of this idea that the Christians were hiding something from us, or that the church was, in the Da Vinci Code. And then with the advent of 6606, there were a lot of religious themed movies because people, once again, were quite scared. And then it came and went and nothing happened as far as we know. For all we know, Antichrist was born, but that's a joke because people actually do believe that. And the Antichrist has nothing to do with 666, but we will get into that later. Now, in the 2000s onward until now, what really marked a change is Paranormal Activity. It came out in 2007, and this changed the landscape of demon movies, which has waxed and waned since then, but it never fully died. The Conjuring movies, starting in 2013, also had a spike of interest in the demonic, along with the lives of Ed and Lorraine Warren and several spin-offs about what is called like the Conjuring or the Warren universe. Last year alone, 14 demon-related movies were released. So demons clearly continue to appeal to us. Otherwise, they would have died out as subject matter because they no longer scare people. And horror movies are actually a really great pulse to look at what is scaring a society at that time or what is making them anxious. For instance, something that comes up in the early 2000s in horror movies was the idea that technology was going to betray us, like Pulse, Fear.com, The Ring, that all of this new technology was actually going to lead us into darker places, maybe places that shouldn't be uncovered. But we get into the idea of movies have this slapped up on screen, and it can. The problem really with a lot of true stories is that the names might be correct or the setting, but nothing else is. In my PowerPoint that I can't really use, there is a picture of the real Conjuring house and then the one that they used in the movie. They're quite different. The one in the movie looks a lot more like a plantation in that style and definitely is giving Southern vibes. I'm not sure if they actually filmed it in the South, but the real Conjuring house is a farmhouse. And, Ed and Lorraine Warren didn't look like Patrick Wilson or Vera Farmiga or any of those things, right? So true doesn't necessarily mean factual. And again, horror movies aren't the problem as a genre. It's well known that this is a fictional genre. And for entertainment purposes is made very clear on paranormal TV shows in the UK, but not in America. Paranormal TV also tells us that demons are everywhere. It practically screams it at us in a lot of shows. But the reality is far less entertaining. Demons are rare. Not only that, it's not that audiences are stupid. It is that there's a form of source amnesia going on. So when people watch a movie about something, they see it and maybe a few years go by, maybe even a few months. And they forget that all they know about that subject, because they've heard about it before, is from a movie. And they don't clock exactly where that's coming from, these ideas. And then on top of that, horror movies are a really good way to build models in your mind about topics you've never thought about. So a good example of this would be voodoo and hoodoo. A lot of white audiences are not very well versed on what voodoo or hoodoo is, thinking they're pretty much the same thing, when in fact they're quite different. And two movies come to mind. If you had ever seen The Skeleton Key or Jezebel, you might believe that voodoo and hoodoo are quite evil, that the idea of spirit possession is actually quite a scary thing. White audiences are terrified of the idea of something taking over us against our will. But in voodoo and hoodoo, spirit possession is voluntary and it is ecstatic. It is a wonderful experience for them. So it's about trying to trace back where people are getting these ideas. And again, not because they're stupid, it's because we're not always keeping track of when weird ideas float in about a specific subject. I was thinking about something having to do with demons the other day, and I'm like, where did I get that? Not everyone's doing that. Not everybody's thinking in that way. Another problem that comes up is paranormal TV, like I was saying. Much of what we see on paranormal TV is scripted or faked, and a lot of shows have leaned into demonic fantasy. I had a few pictures, not to call any specific investigators or shows out. It was of Ghost Adventures, Ghost Hunters, and The Dead Files. The only reason I picked those is because they're recognizable shows, and also because in the 2000s, my mom used to watch these shows, so that meant that I watched them too. But many shows leaned into the idea that demons were the cause of the different phenomena we were seeing. They really up the ante. They make the stakes much higher than if it was an angry ghost, a jinn, a fairy, etc. Also, it is well known in the paranormal that experts are brought in to openly lie and say that something is a demon when it's not. I even had friends who offered to write for the Conjuring series for free, and they were turned. Excuse me. Some specific demonic fantasies that I'll be addressing are the idea that Ouija boards harbor demons, that demons are common, that sin leads to demonic possessions, and examples of that are casual sex and or alcoholism, that regular people can conduct exorcisms, that twins are somehow more susceptible to possession, that demons want your soul, and that 666 is related to the Antichrist directly. So the idea that Ouija boards harbor demons. First off, everybody I know who works in spirit communication in the paranormal uses them. They themselves are not dangerous. It is a tool. And if you don't know how to use that tool, then it can be dangerous, especially if you don't know how to close the session or how to rid yourself of unfriendly spirits, because they could show up. Not only that, people a lot of the time when they're dealing with Ouija boards, they bring the experience that they expect to have with their subconscious. So if you expect to have a negative experience, that's what you're going to have. Not only that, spirits, and it's not every spirit, but there are spirits who will openly lie and say like they're a demon or do something to scare you and to point you in the direction that that's what they are. And this is to scare you. That's really the reason. The reason they want to scare you is because of negative phenomena. It makes it easier for them to manifest. So, Ouija boards don't all have a demon at the end of them. And this is directly from The Exorcist, because people put together, and I'll actually tell you that The Exorcist is 95% correct as far as phenomena. It is a little bit over sensationalized, and I don't know what Pazuzu, which is a real wind demon from Mesopotamia, I don't know what he's doing in whatever town they were in, but you never know. Also, the idea of black masses, not really real. Like they might be in smaller groups, but not, again, to the Satanist, satanic panic large scale they were talking about in the movie. But it is one of the most accurate movies that exists. And unfortunately, people were like, well, it was because she played with a Ouija board. That doesn't mean that it's something that's impossible that could happen. It's improbable that a demon's at the end, because as we get to our next point, demons are not common. They're rare. Demonic intrusions are so rare, actually, that most people who work in demonology have only come across true cases a couple times, if that. Same thing with the paranormal. There are people who don't believe in demons because that's how uncommon they are. And I feel like a lot of movies, a lot of TV shows have just simply promoted the idea, even if it's subtly, that demons are everywhere. If they were everywhere, I would have more to do. So, also the idea that sin leads to demonic possession. So, I actually read recently a exorcist was talking about the different pathways to demonic possession. And those are two reasons that he cited, and I nearly threw the book across the room, because that's not true at all. Because don't you think it would happen more? Simply because there are a lot of people, this is modern times. A lot of people have casual sex. A lot of people abuse alcohol. Now, I'm not going to say that those things are going to help you if you're having some issues with spirits, but those are not the pathways. There's only a few that we know of. One of them is the law of invitation. You have to open the door wide for them. They don't get in the cracks of sin. If they did, a lot more people would have this problem. The law of attraction, which is when somebody is doing something so sick and evil and twisted against their own humanity that a demon is called. It sends up like a dark beacon, and a demon's like, oh, I want to go hang out with that guy because he is so hateful towards humanity, just like me. And we'll get into this later, but like demons don't cause those crimes and that evil, but demons could be called after the fact. And then we also have already inhabited, where a place that maybe you moved into already had a demon there, and you encroached on its space, and it is now able to terrorize you. Demons can't just come into your life. So, but the other one is scent. And this is a very low percentage of category. It is where somebody uses very dark magic to send a demon your way. Demons can be bound by dark magic by a certain period of time, but it's unwise to do such things because it kind of feeds into law of attraction. It starts to destroy you a little bit because it's the kind of magic that's used to harm, steal, or destroy. But anyway, those are the only pathways that we really know about so far. And no demon case I've ever come across has ever been the result of alcoholism or casual sex. Regular people also cannot conduct exorcisms. It is dangerous. People die. And it's not just the person being exorcised that is in danger. It is everybody in the room. The exorcist believer actually shows why this is a bad idea. There are parents in the room. They have a priest. They have a conjurer woman. They have all sorts of people in the circle trying to free these two girls of demons. And what I did like about the movie was the idea that, hoodoo is not very different from Christianity. They have different beliefs, of course, but they're all working towards the same goal, trying to help these two girls. But regular people can't run exorcisms because demons will attack you, first of all. Not only that, they will use your secrets, your foibles, your fears against you to get you to stop the ritual because it's painful to them and they don't want to leave. The reason that possession is such a horrific experience, both inside the person and outside for people looking, is because it is a fight between you and this entity for control over your body. And your will is your own. So you can force these things out just by holding on because this is your body. But regular people should never conduct exorcisms. They're dangerous. Twins being more susceptible to possession is ridiculous. I have never heard of a case like that. And this was a question that actually didn't come to me, but came to a friend of mine who was like, hey, is this a thing? And I was like, no, it is not. What? And then I went to my source who knows a lot more about demons in antiquity. And I was like, is this a thing? And they're like, no. It's not like a big deal. And I get if you saw a movie, you want to ask. I'm not ridiculing people having curiosity. We want you to ask. It's more that this comes from the movie The Unborn, which came out, I want to say, end of the 2010s. And that was a Dybbuk. A Dybbuk is a spirit from Jewish folklore that has been barred from heaven and hell. And they're forced to wander and they seek shelter in people's bodies to kind of be alive once again. But it's forced. It's against spiritual law to possess somebody in that way. Unless you are a spirit of good, which is called an Ebor. But that's really rare. And I think it's more voluntary. But you also have to remember that during the time period where Dibbukim were said to be very active, women mainly, it was also men as well, but mainly women, were in a position where they were trying to get out of bad marriages and marriages they didn't want to be in, and being possessed by a Dybbuk and airing grievances in a public space where they would be listened to was part of that exorcism process. And normally they were people who were once alive and aren't anymore, who once lived in that village, but not always. So very interesting, but no, twins are not more susceptible to possession. If anything, you might even be a little more protected because you're so connected to another person. So there's no evidence that that's a thing. The idea that demons want your soul, there's no evidence of that. I once was at, I think it was like a job interview type of thing. I wasn't talking to the hiring person. I think we were all just sort of talking amongst ourselves. And I was talking about my research in the paranormal. I had just gotten my master's. And this lady, once she found out what I did, she, with her whole chest, was like, no, yeah, demons want your soul. And I was like, no, they don't. Demons don't seem to do anything with the soul. From what the phenomena tells us, demons only cause death in the person being possessed. Otherwise, there's simply no evidence that they, really deal with the soul at all, because once the demon generally leaves or begins to work on somebody else, usually they only have one focus, and that's to get this person to the point of after possession, which is death. And after that, they're expelled anyway because of the idea, like there is this demonic fantasy that, and mainly from movies, that demons can possess dead bodies. And that is just absolutely not true. The only way this is possible is through illusions that they project of maybe like a dead body coming to life. Maybe you're in the morgue. I don't know. I don't know your life, but it's not, demons are not able to take a non-living body, object, and possess it. That's simply not how it works. There needs to be life. So, yeah, just no evidence that they want your soul, but I am always open to looking into cases where people are like, no, they seem to have something to do with the soul. Because the fact is, I could be wrong. This is all based on my research and what I have noticed about demonic phenomena. But the idea that 666 is somehow related to the Antichrist, this comes directly from the Omen. And if you go back and read Revelation, the Antichrist is a separate figure from the number of the beast, which is 666. I've even seen some really interesting movie lore, like in End of Days. They're like, well, often in dreams, things end up like upside down and backward. So it's actually 666 is actually 999, like 1999. It's good movie lore, but it's not true. The thing about it is they're two separate figures. And why would the Antichrist have the number of the beast on him? They're two separate figures. So this is something, though, that I've noticed when it comes to people commenting in public forums and on social media. When someone will call something demonic or somebody possessed, and then inevitably the Antichrist will be mentioned by someone else, because I think that these genres, the haunted house film, the demonic possession film, and Antichrist films, they're all in a convoluted knot in public consciousness. The public doesn't seem to know that there's a huge difference in theme, in characterization, in all sorts of things in these movies. They're all the same genre to most of the public. So those are some specific demonic fantasies, and why you have to be careful of the information being given to you. You have to be critical of your sources, because it's not just movies. It's also paranormal celebrities who sometimes say things that aren't true. And it's hard to say why they're saying them. I'm not going to speculate, but people get things wrong. So sometimes benefit of the doubt. But at times, we also have to keep in mind that the church, sometimes Catholics, and this isn't to bash Catholics. It's more to point out that the Vatican probably knows more about demons than anybody, and yet they're still saying things that don't quite make sense according to the current research. But you're allowed to believe what you want. Now let's get into Annabelle. So Annabelle is a rag doll. This was a Warren's case. If you're in the paranormal community, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And you're probably rolling your eyes a little bit, like I was. I was like, I have to put in a slide about her, don't I? So, like I said, this is a Warren's case. Two nurses became extremely frightened when a rag doll one of their moms had picked up for them began to act as if it were alive, and when they consulted a medium, they were told that it was a spirit named Annabelle Higgins. They were told to give the doll permission to inhabit their home, and when they did, the phenomena got much, much worse. The Warrens were called in, and they were told that the doll was actually a conduit for a demon, and demons can't possess anything or anyone without life, like I was saying, but they can move around things to convince somebody that it's alive. Now, she is on a tour around the US, and while she was in New Orleans, a plantation burned down and convicts escaped to prison, things that happen pretty much every day in a lot of cities. But somebody in the paranormal made a joke about it, and then the public took it and ran. They were like, oh my gosh, where is she going next? Are we in danger? And then someone made another joke and was like, she's escaped. The public believed that one too. I think because it's a really good story. In folklore, there's this idea that if the story is true, then we can begin to unfortunately build entire worlds, entire storylines based off of the idea that the story is giving us. And sometimes movies do this as well, where they take existing folklore and they add to it in their own way. Nothing wrong with that. It makes for a really good story. But this was just the public kind of taking things a little too far. And becoming afraid to the point where the people running this operation were like, nope, she's in her box. We promise. And showing, video footage of her and everything. But here's the truth. If a demon was still messing with Annabelle, a box, doesn't matter if it's blessed every day, is not going to hold it. Demons are much more powerful than that. They cannot be contained by human means. So my best guess as to what's happening with Annabelle, if this is a true story, because the Warrens are a very controversial figures in the paranormal. If this is a true story, perhaps at one time, Annabelle was a real problem. But now, this demon likely left her alone as a conduit, and dark energy probably still exists around her, but we don't know that for sure. I've never met her. I've never been in contact with her, but also it can't be corroborated that she has ever caused misfortune for like making fun of her or anything like that. So Annabelle is likely not dangerous. I can't say for sure since I haven't met her, but just based on the evidence and what I do know about that case, probably not. Now we're going to talk about The Conjuring and how it is 90% accurate. So the Annabelle doll phenomena is the first part of the movie. They show a porcelain doll that isn't her. She's actually a rag doll. The one in the movie's creepier, I think. But there are some phenomena that can be done, like moving the doll, writing notes, destroying belongings. Throwing away the doll doesn't solve it because of teleportation. And the doll would only work in this context if it was used as a conduit. Animals do tend to sense dark entities faster than we do. A natural cold is a way that demons announce themselves as they manifest because they are drawing the warmth and energy from a room. One of the girls complains of a smell that smells like something died. This is part of real demonic phenomena. Other things that are accurate are clocks stopping at specific times, what's nicknamed Trinity knocks, when knocking happens 3 times. But the truth is, knocking could happen in 4s, 5s. It doesn't really matter, but the knocking is real. Doors opening and closing by themselves, also slamming, same thing with windows, yanking on parts of people's bodies. Threats from the demonic are typical, usually that they will hurt somebody that you love. The destruction of property ends up happening around them, and electrical problems. Also, the sound of a child or children laughing is factual. Also, being knocked down the stairs is really common. It's a particularly nasty trick of theirs to push somebody when they're on the stairs. The thing that is slightly inaccurate is actually kind of a funny part. Christine complains about Nancy's farting while she's half asleep. Demonic entities, though, are much, much worse. Christine would have been retching or forced to leave the room if they were being fully accurate. Because of how intense this phenomena is, it's an assault on your senses. It might be that you can see a huge dark figure, blacker than black, and you're hearing screaming, and you're smelling something that could be bodily fluids, it could be a rotting carcass, what have you. And it makes you want to throw up. They are trying to scare you in any way, shape, or form that they can come up with. In The Conjuring 2, this one is 85% accurate. Ouija boards can call unfriendly entities to oneself, but it's not as common as media would have us believe. Demons can attach themselves to human spirits. Toys doing really weird things is true, especially as a way for entities to reveal themselves to children or to freak out adults. Random screaming out loud is a thing, things moving around. It's one of the first things people notice. Demonic entities do hop in and out of people because usually they've regained their will or because the body begins to break down. Demons are so unlike us that they cannot exist in a human body and it stay intact. Music players turn on by themselves, other electrical things usually blaringly loud, sometimes even without a plug or being plugged in. Demons do growl in a guttural way. Negative energy and emotional distress is what feeds them. Exorcists do need the name of the entity to gain power over them. Metal does get bent into very strange shapes around demons because they are inhumanly strong. Possessed people can contort themselves into strange places that they shouldn't be able to fit. Bite marks are common. What's mainly inaccurate about the movie is that demons are usually taller and they don't show up as nuns. Why would they unless that specifically scared you? Also, Valak is a real demon and he doesn't look like that. Although, once again, demon, he could be a djinn. The crosses turning upside down, that's a satanic panic thing. More likely a demon would destroy them or change the shape of them because they're painful to them. Not every demonic experience is the result of using the occult. And the painting effect, where it was actually a cool effect where like the fingers came out from behind the painting and then the demon came after her. That's not real. That's not how paintings work unless it's an illusion. Then we get into The Conjuring 3. This one is 30% accurate. And because I am rapidly running out of time, I'm just going to go to what's inaccurate about it. It takes time to break down the will of a person for possession. It's never instantaneous, like it is in the movie where he's like, come into me. It's the same thing in The Exorcist. Because you still own your body. You can't just do it just like that, even if you give permission. Demons don't usually take the form of the conjurer. Why would they? They hate humans. Someone can be pushed to suicide or to murder another person, but less than 5 demonic cases have ever reported such a thing. So we have the free will to resist what a demon is telling us to do. The corpse being animated is a good illusion, but again, there needs to be life. Now I'm going to skip to what is inaccurate about Exorcist Believer. The pendulum divination seance is not going to summon a demon unless the demon was there prior. Possession's not an easy process. It takes time, even if they're a child. It's impossible for a living person to go to hell and then come back. That's not how that works. Regular people shouldn't and cannot conduct exorcisms, and baptism has nothing to do with the ability to possess a person. People of many faiths and who have been baptized can become possessed. Now, when it comes to demons, serial killers, and mass shootings, I think it's comforting to believe that only a demon could bring about this kind of evil in the world. But the fact is, people are evil. They don't need demons' help. But through the law of attraction, a demon could be called after the fact, after they've already done their horrible crimes. Even when satanic imagery is involved in a case, it's usually because of religious trauma, sorry, y'all, or it's a form of ostension. And this is a term from folklore that means somebody's trying to act out an existing story or legend, and this includes movies. So there isn't any evidence of demonic interference in serial killers or mass shootings, even when like a pentagram's on the wall. People like to act out the part of the villain. Like this is a real example. A guy he called himself Pazuzu and had occult stuff in his apartment so that he could act out that role from The Exorcist. But the fact is, it's more comforting to think, oh, of course it has to be a demon. Human beings aren't this evil, but they are. And not only that, serial killers read and absorb the same media that we do. David Berkowitz, who is the son of Sam, thought he was possessed after reading Malachi Martin's Hostage to the Devil. Jeffrey Dahmer really loved The Exorcist 3. This is a very real phenomena that we're all absorbing the same stuff, including pastors, including people who tell you what to believe about religion and Christianity. Because the fact is, biblical awareness is very high, biblical literacy is low. And then what is the big problem? People die. The witch panics of the early modern era, so about 1450 to 1800, murdered many, many women because of demonic fantasy. Demonic fantasy directly leads into satanic panic, which is starting to begin again, with Christians fearing attacks via magic, and it leads to hate crimes of the already religiously marginalized, like Satanists, pagans, see what else. Anybody who practices any kind of magic, occult shops are being hate crimed. Like this is happening. And besides being inaccurate and causing more fear, demons always have a source in TV and movies, and it's almost always witchcraft, and it's othering other types of religions to say, oh, well, it's not us doing this, it's them. They are the ones who called this evil down upon us. And that's how witch panics happened, because witch folklore as we know it came from upper clergymen's overblown fantasies about what were the witches up to. Things like copulating with the devil, dancing naked around a fire covered in blood. I can tell you right now, especially in New England and some of these countries, no one was dancing naked around fires. It's way too cold for that. Or that demons were being used as familiars to do witches' bidding. This is all common knowledge by the time of Salem in 1692. So demonic fantasy is real. It is a huge problem. And this is a side note, it is really hard to undo. It is really hard to explain to people that their long-held demonic beliefs aren't true and that they come from a specific movie. That's pretty much why I'm writing my next book. I'll be presenting a lot of this research at Haunted America end of this month, but someone has to unravel what the public thinks they know. But that's the end of my spiel. Hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, I'm going to turn it back over to Ted.
Oh, it was absolutely fantastic. We had a lot of people coming in to say hi. Not any questions, but I did write some things down. First of all,
Sure.
I need a list of all the movies you mentioned. Because I love horror movies. And every time, like I've seen most of the ones you've mentioned, but there are a couple there I know I'm like, I've heard of that one. I need to go watch it. So I'm gonna need the list of all those, like stat. Today was my last day of work I'm a teacher. So like today was the last day with kids. Okay. So like I've got time now to catch up on all the movies I want to watch. I also, as a player of Dungeons and Dragons, would love to know how um, that fits into the narrative that you've given us based on pop culture in the 80s and 90s too. Um, Not for now. I definitely can get you on again, and we can talk about um, more stuff along those lines. I find it interesting is that as a Christian myself, I grew up fearing 666, but as an
Mhm.
educated individual, you do your research, and it's funny that the early translations don't say 666; they say 616. So if the early
Hmm.
translations are correct, then the 666 is nothing to fear. And I wonder if we as a society have created an egregore around 666. So does that make sense?
I think so.
Yeah,
It does actually.
yeah.
There's a lot of stuff in the Bible like that. Like, for instance, the long told story of how Satan was in the garden as a serpent. Biblical scholars have looked into that, and it was a chaos creature who was out there doing the chaos. And that's Satan was nowhere near that the Eden at the time. And the reason that we think about the apple, a lot of other people think it might be a pomegranate or
Mhm.
something similar. But the apple comes to us actually from John Milton in Paradise Lost. And that
Mhm.
story became the big overarching story because it's such a good story. He was able to fill in the
Yeah.
gaps in our imagination, but the fruit is never named. So it might be an apple, but it probably isn't. And a lot of stuff like that in the Bible is misconstrued because, like I was saying, Bible literacy is low, but awareness of the Bible is quite high.
You also mentioned about flipping 666 to get 999, and I wanted to mention that if you
Hmm.
flip 616, you get 919,
Hmm.
which is the area code that I live in. So maybe I do live in hell.
Nice.
Um,
There are so many entrances to hell at this point. Like, I've heard it in every town I've ever lived in. So I think you're fine. Don't worry about it.
the Raleigh Durham folk, beware.
Yeah.
Oh,
Careful. Like, okay, I'm not going to tell you that North Carolina didn't have some weird energy when I was there for Con Carolinas, but nothing to that level.
we'll have to talk then, because this is my home state. So I'd love to hear your
Right.
what you felt. Well, thank Victoria. Thank you so much. This was very fascinating and extremely thought provoking. And thank you all for tuning in this evening and being part of our growing community here in the paranormal. If you enjoyed tonight's session, be sure to like and follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss the next one. You can also look up Victoria J and subscribe and follow her as well. And don't forget about the Paranormal Research Symposium coming up in August. Until next time, good night, everybody.